All right, well, thanks everyone for coming this morning. We're just a little past 11, so we'll go ahead and get started. This is Teresa Hebron. I'm the digital metadata librarian here at Mountain West, and we want to thank everyone for coming to our third Mountain West Digital Library webinar for 2019. This is our fall webinar, and we're already scheduling events into early 2020, so if you're interested in participating or being a presenter next year, please let me or Kinza know. So in news that you can't make up, I was driving to the library this morning and I was following a car that had a license plate holder that said, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." So that seems serendipitous because while many of you already know Rebecca Cummings as the former assistant director and outreach librarian from Mountain West Digital Library, she is currently the Digital Matters librarian here at University of Utah's J. Willard Marriott Library. And Rebecca is going to discuss turning digital library collections into computationally amenable data sets and Marriott Libraries projects that have been inspired by the Already Always Computational and Collections as Data Part to Whole projects, respectively from 2016 and 2018. So we are recording this presentation, and as you probably just heard, Rebecca's already muted everyone's audio so that we can get a clean recording. If you do need to drop out early for any reason, thank you in advance for coming, and we're going to be making the recording of this webinar available shortly afterwards. So please hold your questions until the end, and then we're going to have plenty of time for questions and discussion at that time. So please feel free to use the chat to post your questions if you want, or if you want to unmute yourselves at the end and ask your questions directly, we can do that too. So with that, I will mute myself and turn things over to Rebecca. Thanks everyone for coming.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa, for the kind introduction, and to the Mountain West Digital Library for hosting today. Welcome everyone to the MWDL Collections as Data webinar. Thank you so much for being here. I know how busy you all are, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to learn more about this relatively new topic. I'm Rebecca Cummings, and today we're going to be talking about turning the objects in your digital library collections into data sets that are ready for computational use. I'm probably going to be talking for about 35, maybe 40. I'm hoping for 35 minutes. And then we're going to reserve about 20 minutes at the end for questions and discussions. As Teresa said, if you have a question during my talk, please go ahead, put that in the Zoom chat, and we'll try to get to those first during the Q&A. I do know a lot of you just scanning the participant list, but for those of you that I don't know, this is me with my two smallest children. I work at the University of Utah as the librarian for the Digital Matters space in the Marriott Library. Digital Matters is the product of a four-college partnership between the College of Humanities, the College of Fine Arts, the College of Architecture and Planning, and the Marriott Library. And the goal of the space is to be a place where researchers in the arts and humanities can learn about or experiment with technology and digital methods. So basically, my job roughly translates to being a digital humanities librarian embedded in a digital scholarship space. And in my previous position, I was the data management librarian for the arts, humanities, and social sciences at the U, which also really informs the work that I'm going to talk about today. Before I officially launch into talking about collections as data, I feel like I need to acknowledge these two people you see up here on the screen. Many of you know Thomas Padilla at UNLV, and if your name's Corey Lampert and you're here, you might even share a workspace with him. The momentum behind collections as data is really due in large part to his scholarship and organizing efforts behind this movement. I had the opportunity to attend a week-long HILT course over the summer on collections as data, which was taught by Thomas and Mia Ridge from the British Library, which really deepened my understanding of collections as data, and it helped the team at the Marriott Library move forward with our collections as data pilot projects. So I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you, Thomas and Mia, for providing me with that foundational knowledge. And for the attendees that are here today, if this webinar sparks your interest or you're already interested in collections as data, I highly recommend checking to see if HILT is going to offer that course again next summer. For my last acknowledgement slide here, everything that I'm going to talk about today from the Marriott Library was spearheaded by this awesome group that you see here on the slide. I really just can't say enough nice things about working with them. They're a wonderful team. So this is the collections as data team at the Marriott Library. Over on the left, we have Jeremy Minty, who is the head of digital library services, Rachel Whitman, who's our digital curation librarian, a familiar face to many of you, I'm sure, that are here, Anna Nietrauer, who's our digital initiatives librarian, and I'm right there on the bottom right of the slide. So thanks to the team for letting me speak on behalf of our collective work, and I really hope that it's implicit on every single slide that this was a group effort between all of us. Okay, so let's get going. This is the material that we're going to cover in the Collections as Data webinar. We're going to start by trying to answer that basic question. What is or what are collections as data? Who benefits from them? And why should we even go to the effort of incorporating a collections as data framework into our digital libraries? Next, we're going to talk about the background and considerations around collections as data. Then I'm going to spend a good amount of time talking about our pilot collections as data projects at the U, highlighting 4 digital collections that we turned into data sets and applied digital humanities methods to the best of our abilities. Relatedly, we're going to cover some of the things that you can do to move towards a collections as data model at your own institutions, followed by some resources and training opportunities. And last, but certainly not least, we're going to reserve a substantial amount of time for questions and discussion at the end, because I'm sure that many of you are doing similar work or considering doing similar work, and I'd love to hear about your experiences as well. Okay, so let's start by thinking about our library collections. The library is sometimes described as the laboratory of the humanities, and the content of our collections are described as data for the humanities. And it is data in the sense that our collections, whether they be books or journals or photographs or whatever, those are the raw materials for a good portion of humanities research and what many humanists look to for evidence when they're conducting their research. But of course, most of the items in our collections, even the content of our research databases, are not as amenable to being computationally parsed as data is in the sciences and the social sciences, where researchers work more frequently with quantitative data that was collected for the express purpose of being analyzed computationally. For one thing, the vast majority of the objects in our collections are not born digital or digitized. And even when things are digital, they aren't usually in a format that's useful for digital humanists. Most of our digital books, for example, are individual PDFs and aren't readily available for bulk download. If you wanted to use those texts for a text mining project, for example, you would have to download them individually or figure out a workaround to automate that process, OCR the texts if they aren't already OCR'd, combine them and convert them into a format that a text mining tool can manipulate, something like a plain text TXT file. Now, many digital humanists will tell you that acquiring and cleaning data is one of the biggest impediments and one of the biggest time commitments to doing digital humanities work. Collections as data is really grounded in 2 things that have been happening in parallel over the past few decades. First, as you're all intimately familiar with, oh no. Okay, got a little feedback there. Hopefully that's resolved. But I was going to say, first, as you're all intimately familiar with, libraries and archives have been digitizing the content of our special collections, paying special attention to high-use collections that researchers traditionally flew across the world to see. Digitization has primarily been about the ability to democratize collections so that people anywhere can access objects of historical significance. And we really can't underestimate how revolutionary that's been for the research process. That being said, just because something is digital and available online doesn't mean there aren't still significant barriers to using our collections for computational research. A collection digitized in the early 2000s, for example, might have poor OCR, incomplete metadata, or misplaced master files after multiple system migrations. Even today, most of the digital collections that we create and the systems that we use seem to anticipate use that resembles traditional use, which is scholars looking through the objects one at a time, as opposed to downloading them in bulk. Now, over the same period of time where we've been digitizing things and putting them online, more and more humanists have been using computational means to ask questions and to identify patterns using methods such as text mining, topic modeling, network analysis, data visualization, GIS, or a variety of other ways to understand and visualize their data and to approach their research questions in new ways. As a result in this type of research, libraries have seen an increase in direct requests for bulk delivery of textual corpora. And some have even seen increased traffic on their websites from researchers scraping our library collections through automated processes. It's becoming obvious to some of us in the library community that digital humanists are not being well served by our existing systems and access to our digital collections. And that is where collections as data comes in. Now, as a former data management librarian, I feel like I can't not have a slide that explains what I mean when I say humanities data. When we talk about humanities data, what we're often talking about are a wide variety of things that you might find in our digital collections. Things like books, newspapers, letters, birth, death, marriage, and employment records, maps, images, videos, art, recipes and cookbooks, oral histories, diaries and journals, sounds, yearbooks. Really, any record of human history could be something that someone would want to look at scale. However, some of the items that we digitize are more amenable to computation than others. It might be easier to turn a newspaper run into a plain text OCR file than figuring out how to facilitate image analysis at scale. I just want to emphasize from the beginning of this presentation that it's not critical or even feasible that you turn every one of your collections into a data set, or that you'll be able to anticipate the needs of every potential researcher, but rather that we just start considering how we can better meet the needs of researchers looking to use our collections at scale. And of course, when we're talking about things that can be analyzed in our collections, we can't forget about our awesome metadata. Digital libraries have loads of metadata that isn't always readily available for bulk download, or even when it is, we don't really advertise that it is. For some of our collections, there's a lot you could do with the metadata. Consider DPLA, who has always treated their metadata as data and provided ways for developers to access that data via open APIs and bulk downloads so other people can do cool things with it, like develop apps or make Twitter bots or perform analysis on their 35 million records. So to wrap up this section for what is collections as data, I'm going to use a slide that was shared by Thomas Padilla at HILT, which I found to be an elegant answer to that question. Collections as data are ordered information that are stored digitally and that are amenable to computation. So let's talk a little bit now about the history and the background of collections as data. While the term collections as data might seem somewhat new and kind of like the hot thing in digital libraries right now, it's worth noting that there have been efforts for a long time to make digital library collections available as data sets for researchers, usually in the form of bulk downloads of text or metadata for analysis. Here are 3 high-profile examples of that. JSTOR, which most of us are familiar with, has provided custom data sets on demand since the late 1990s. And in 2008, they launched JSTOR for Data, which allows users to access bulk metadata and full-text OCR of archival journal content for free. Similarly, in 2011, the HathiTrust launched the HathiTrust Research Center, which currently enables computational analysis of the 14 million volumes in the HathiTrust corpus. Dropping down to the bottom of the slide, since the mid-1980s, the Getty Research Institute has created various ways to access and search their vast art and architectural holdings, such as the Getty Provenance Index, which currently contains more than 2.3 million records taken from source materials such as archival inventories, auction catalogs, and dealer stock books. Now, these are examples of well-supported, well-documented, highly used collections as data that were friendly to digital humanists before any of us were really using the term collections as data. The problem is that until recently, the only collections as data projects that had much visibility were coming from high-profile institutions with large budgets and development teams like the Library of Congress, the British Library, or the institutions that were mentioned on this slide. And then, at the risk of sounding incredibly cheesy, in 2016, there was a new dawn for collections as data. Thomas Padilla and his collaborators were awarded $100,000 from IMLS for the project Always Already Computational, which, according to their website, aimed to document and share current and potential approaches to developing cultural heritage collections that support computationally driven research and teaching. Thomas's team held 2 national forums, a series of workshops, and produced nearly a dozen highly useful deliverables to guide institutions as they considered implementing collections as data. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't know the term collections as data existed before Always Already Computational, but since 2016, I feel like I hear this term all the time in CFPs, grant opportunities, conference presentations, HILT courses, Twitter, everywhere, which is a real credit to Thomas and his team for putting this idea on the forefront of the digital library community. Always Already Computational was really like a fact-finding mission, and the team produced a ton of documentation and resources, some of which you see here on this screen. For example, they produced a final report, including a description of their deliverables, their findings from the national forums and workshops, and areas for further investigation. The Santa Barbara Statement on Collections as Data is a second deliverable from this project, which suggests a set of underlying and foundational principles for undertaking collections as data work. Some of those principles include things like transparency, interoperability, openness, lowering barriers to use, and an ethical commitment to work against historical and contemporary injustice in the way that our collections are built, described, and made accessible. The facets include 15 case studies on how collections as data has been implemented at a variety of institutions of various sizes and types. The personas are representations of the kind of people engaged with collections as data. They include a wide variety of roles like library administrator, faculty member, undergrad, archivist, repository services manager, data curator, software developer, and just really talks about the motivations behind why these people engage with collections as data. The last deliverable I'm going to highlight is 50 Things, which is an exceedingly practical list of 50 things that you can do at your institution to get started on collections as data. I wish so badly I had time to walk you through all these deliverables, but I really don't today. So I'm just going to put links on the slide here, and I encourage you that when you have time to go investigate these further on your own, especially if you're considering doing this work at your digital library. Now, continuing the work of Always Already Computational, in 2018, Thomas Padilla and his team were granted $750,000 from the Mellon Foundation to fund and support 2 cohorts of 6 collections as data project teams, jointly led by librarians, disciplinary scholars, and administrators. The reason for the makeup of these teams was to support implementation of collections as data at libraries, archives, and museums, and to make immediate use of the collections by the disciplinary scholar on the team. Members of the first cohort included the Carnegie Museum of Art, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Northwestern University, University of Pittsburgh, the Weeksville Heritage Center, and the University of Denver. The image on this page is just an awesome tweet in response to collections as data part to whole from SAA 2018. So thank you, Twitter, and thank you at JoeCar25 for that, because it made me laugh. Again, I wish I had time to highlight all 6 projects, but I'm just going to choose 2 that I thought were particularly interesting. One project, On the Books, Jim Crow and Algorithms of Resistance, used machine learning to analyze a corpus of more than 100 years of North Carolina public, private, and local laws from the end of the Civil War through the Civil Rights Movement. One goal of the project was to create a complete list of North Carolina Jim Crow laws from 1877 to 1965. And the planned deliverables from this project included a plain text corpus, a website for educators and researchers, a white paper, a code repository, a methods workshop at a Digital Humanities Institute, and a North Carolina K-12 teachers workshop. The other project that I'll highlight here is the Linking Lost Jazz Shrine project from the Weeksville Heritage Center in Brooklyn, New York. The project leads at Weeksville aimed to apply linked data principles to a collection that documented Central Brooklyn's cultural legacy of jazz history between the 1930s and the 1960s, in the hopes of making the collection and the connections more discoverable to jazz researchers. Now, the other 4 projects from cohort 1 were equally cool, and I encourage you to go check those out. And I believe the second collections as data part to whole cohort will be announced next month, so we can keep our eyes open for those projects as well for more examples. Now, this brings me back to where we're at my institution, the Marriott Library, in regards to collections as data. We don't have external funding or a mandate from administration to pursue this research, but a small team of us were interested in exploring collections as data as a pilot. It made particular sense to us with the development of the digital matters space in the library, where we really do anticipate users looking to apply digital methods to our library collections. Digital humanities has grown really rapidly at the University of Utah. We've had a series of strategic DH hires in English and history that bring a digital methods skill set to the U. The Digital Matters Lab launched as a space in 2017, and we moved into a new, larger space in 2018. And as of this year, the U has a Digital Cultural Studies certificate with the plans to eventually grow that certificate into a digital humanities minor. So we really see there being more pedagogical opportunities for collections as data in the near future as well. And of course, the Marriott Library has a robust digital library with over 1 million digital objects and Utah Digital Newspapers, which has over 4 million pages of newspaper content. So our team started meeting in 2019 and brought a combination of skills to the table, including knowledge of digital libraries, data management, metadata, digital humanities, and GIS. The first question for us was, what collections do we want to turn into data sets? We really wanted to find something that was text-based to start with so that it would be amenable to text mining and topic modeling, which are two common digital humanities methods. We needed something large enough to necessitate analysis at scale. We preferably wanted something without copyright restrictions, and we really wanted something that reflected the local history of Utah. Ultimately, we selected a subset of our oral history collections that already had typewritten transcriptions with high quality OCR. We built a corpus of select mining oral histories drawn from the collections that you see on this slide, which in total produced a corpus of 230 oral histories. We tried to approach the collection as if we had no special access to it, to figure how to get the data out of our library systems. Of course, as library faculty, we could have just extracted the PDFs from the back end of our library systems, but instead we approached the project as if we were digital humanists, and we came up with a system to automate extraction from the front end. Once we extracted the data using Anna Nietrauer's magical command line data harvesting method, we were able to combine it into plain text files and share the corpus into our newly created Marriott Library Collections as Data GitHub repository. An additional benefit of this project was that we could give it a funny name, text mining texts, because we were using oral histories about mining in Utah and doing text mining on them as well. We all know how librarians love double entendres and clever names, so for us, that just felt like an added bonus. Now, after getting the data set online, we then ran topic models on the corpus looking for common themes. Here's one of the topics that was suggested to us that had a focus on wine, winemaking, and some of the immigrant groups associated with that topic, like Italian, Greek, and French. We approached the process of topic modeling the oral histories as an exploration, but after reviewing the results, we discovered that many of the words and themes which surfaced through the topic modeling actually pointed to deficiencies in the original descriptive metadata, highlighting new possibilities for access points. For instance, none of the metadata records for these interviews included the topic of wine or winemaking. So not only was this process fun and exploratory for our team, but it also showed us a new way of identifying gaps in the descriptive metadata, where we might want to consider adding additional access points based on themes that emerged in the topic modeling process. The second collection that we chose as a pilot project was the Harold Stanley Sanders Matchbook Collection, an assortment of 680 matchbooks from the 1930s to the 1970s that reflect many bygone establishments in Salt Lake City, including restaurants, bars, hotels, and other businesses. The image on this slide is actually for a bar that still exists downtown today, Bar X on 2nd Street. I particularly love the 5-digit phone number on this matchbook here. We chose this collection because the metadata included addresses, which Rachel Whitman, our GIS wizard, then geocoded using Google Sheets add-on called Geocode Cells. With the addition of latitude and longitude to the metadata, Rachel was then able to map the collection using ArcGIS Online. This is the resulting map that Rachel was able to create, where you can hover over the dots and see images from the collection and start to get a sense of historic Salt Lake. You can see here the dots are color-coded by business type, with the majority of them being bars and restaurants. And you can also see that despite Utah's famously restrictive alcohol laws, downtown Salt Lake has had a thriving nightlife and plenty of locations where people can imbibe for quite some time. The geographic coordinate data and a link to the interactive map are also available on the Marriott Library Collections as Data GitHub repository. One of the Marriott Library's collections is 40,000 personnel records from the Kennecott Mines, who are a major employer here in Utah. And these records are from 1900 to 1919. These handwritten index cards contain a variety of interesting demographic data about the workers who were employed by Kennecott, such as name, date employed, address, dependents, age, weight, height, eye color, hair, gender, nationality, last employer, education, occupation, department, pay rate, date leaving employment, and reason for leaving. So just tons of data. And obviously, in a perfect collections as data world, these cards would be available as structured data that you could sort and parse to uncover all kinds of interesting information. But transcription of 40,000 records would be incredibly labor and time intensive. To make the records more searchable at a variable level, Anna Nietrauer proposed a collection metadata template for this collection, introducing new non-standard fields to allow researchers to get at least some of the granular information on these cards. 20 new fields in the template reflect the demographic data on the cards, and 10 are existing fields that map to our standard practices with Dublin Core. Now, because we don't have the staffing to transcribe all 40,000 records, Anna is implementing a phased approach of transcribing 4 basic fields, with fuller transcription to follow if we're able to secure additional funding. Anna was able to secure $5,000 of pilot funding for the Kennecott Records project this semester as a Digital Matters faculty fellow, and I'm so proud that Digital Matters has a small part in supporting this project. Okay, so I know examples should come in threes, but I can't help but share one more pilot project, the Women's Exponent Project. In 2019, our Collections as Data team became aware of the upcoming 150th anniversary of women in Utah being the first to vote in the nation, and we wanted to do a project that corresponded with that important moment in Utah history. We discovered the Women's Exponent, a historical women's newspaper published between 1872 and 1914. That was a passionate voice for women's suffrage, education, and plural marriage, and chronicled the interests and daily lives of Latter-day Saint women in this period. The Women's Exponent was originally scanned and hosted by BYU in 2000, so it's what we would call a legacy digital collection. We asked BYU if they would be willing to share the digital files of the Exponent so we could employ digital humanities methods on it. BYU quickly and graciously shared their files in their entirety. Thank you, Scott Eldridge and Elizabeth Smart. But we quickly realized that the OCR from 2000 wasn't clean enough for meaningful analysis. So acquiring data for the Women's Exponent project illuminated the challenges for us that digital humanists face when looking for clean data. Our original assumption was that if something had been scanned and was put online, the data must exist somewhere. We soon learned that when working with legacy digital scans, the OCR might be insufficient or the original high-quality scans might be lost over the course of system migrations. Partnered with BYU, our newly expanded team rescanned the Exponent, which resulted in better, but far from perfect OCR. We tried some topic modeling on the corpus and made the OCR available as a TSV file in our GitHub repository. We became so interested in the Exponent, though, that we became a larger team comprised of U of U and BYU faculty and librarians. We created an Omeka site that highlighted notable themes in the Exponent, such as suffrage, household hints, women in medicine, anti-polygamy laws, advertisements, and more. We also included a scholarship section in the Omeka site where you can explore heat maps of the Exponent and mine the corpus with the Voyant plugin using our TSV file. Our next goal with the Exponent is to secure funding that would allow us to use natural language processing and machine learning to extract entities, such as people, locations, and subjects out of the Exponent. We would love to have an encoded version of the Exponent that would allow us to do author analysis or maybe a social network graph of the women of the Exponent. For us, considering the different kinds of projects that we could apply to the Exponent has really expanded our thinking about how the different actions that we take on the data really affects the way that a researcher can explore and interrogate the corpus. This is a screenshot of the current Marriott Library Collections as Data GitHub. Just wanted to give a big prop to Anna for doing the majority of the work getting this set up and populated. It's kind of cool to see an example of how we extracted the data and made it available. Obviously this is our way and there's probably different ways, but I'll have this included as a link at the end of the slideshow. So that's what we've done so far at the Marriott Library. Based on our early experiences experimenting with collections as data, I just kind of put together some steps that you might want to consider if you're planning on moving towards a collections as data model for your digital library. One, I would highly recommend reading 50 Things and whatever always already computational and collections as data part-to-whole documentation you can get your hands on. These are really great resources that give you a practical and theoretical foundation for collections as data work. Two, create a team. Hopefully who bring a relevant skill set to the table or just a high interest in the idea of collections as data. You should, of course, have people from the digital library, and you might want to consider also people from digital humanities or liaisons to different departments, people who are interested in things like metadata or copyright. And if possible, try to include digital humanists on campus so that they can inform the projects with the kind of data that they would want to use, and hopefully that they would use should you make the data available. Three, identify a few digital library collections that lend themselves to computation. Do they have good metadata? Are they open access? Do they have good high quality OCR? Are they high use collections that people are already exploring? Are they relevant to a high-profile academic program or research area at your institution? Make sure that once you start this work, you keep a list of data holdings, and as you continue to experiment and have different projects and add collections, you can watch your list of data holdings grow. 4, consider what methods can be applied to the data in the format that you make it available. Different digital methods and tools require different data formats. If you undertake this work, partner with a librarian interested in digital humanities to see what formats researchers might be looking for. And remember that it's totally okay if you can't anticipate or meet the needs of every researcher. That's just kind of the process, and unfortunately, we can't really help everybody. We can try though. 5, make the data available for bulk download and visible in whatever way you can. GitHub was our solution, but you might find a different solution that works for you in your library. If you have a data repository in your library, you might want to check that out and see what their storage caps are and what file types they accept, because that might end up being a solution as well. 6, partner with disciplinary scholars. Hopefully by including a disciplinary scholar, it will lead to the use of your collection and then strengthen partnerships between librarians and campus faculty. Librarians really are natural partners in DH work, but subject specialists are critical to analysis of the collections and meaning making when they're looking at our digital collections at scale. And then 7, move from a pilot to a core organizational activity. If you think this work aligns with the principles of the priorities of your library, consider how you can move it from being a pilot project to something that's just part of your standard digital library workflow. Present the findings from your pilot to administration and continue to keep them informed on your work. Consider who's responsible for the work long term. Can it be incorporated into your current systems? Do you need external funding, or is it something that could be absorbed into your institutional budget and current staffing configuration? And please, as you move from the pilot activities to the core organizational activities, publish on your work so we can continue to learn from each other. Okay, so anyone who works with me will tell you that I have a tendency to get excited about projects without giving proper weight to the challenges and potential drawbacks. And I really want to make sure that I don't do that today. There are plenty of challenges associated with taking on collections as data, many of which will look familiar to you if you work in digital libraries already. For instance, selection. What collections do we turn into data sets, and who's your audience? Do we just pick the low-hanging fruit, like text that's easier to convert? Do you pick your highest use collections? Do you reach out to a partner first and then tailor your project to their needs? There's a lot of considerations there, which leads us to challenge number 2, priorities. It's really hard to give our valuable time for unknown future users and to make a whole bunch of collections into data sets when we don't know who will be using our collections or what data they'll be looking for. Do we make a lot of collections available as data and just hope people use them? Or do we instead just convert collections on demand when needed? So of course, you get a little bit of a chicken and egg thing here. What comes first, the collections as data or the collections as data user? Another way to put it is, do we create the data set just in time when someone needs it, or do we have the data ready just in case someone needs it? 3, more product, less process, or the opposite. Do we choose more product, less process, or less product, more process? When it comes to preparing these data sets, do we make more data sets available with minimal cleaning and documentation, or fewer data sets that have been lovingly curated for a specific audience? My inclination is to start with the latter, but I'm sure that this is something that we can debate for the next decade or so. 4 is a relatively straightforward challenge. How do we move from a pilot or an experiment to core organizational activity? Does collections as data work with our current systems and staffing models, or is this going to require a big overhaul to make it standard practice for digital libraries? And then lastly, promotion. The thing that most of us, I won't say all of us, most of us are kind of terrible at. Once you have the data sets, how do you let people know about them? This just seems to be a perennial problem, but it's silly to go to the work of doing all this and then not letting people know that we've done it. So that promotional piece is something that we need to make sure that we address as well. I will say though that despite these challenges, I see a lot of opportunities to meet the needs of researchers and to support emerging forms of scholarship with this. So I included some of the resources that we talked about today. Actually, the collections as data and always already computational links have links to all the resources associated with those. And I think Teresa will distribute these slides to the MWDL listserv, but if you're not on that list, please feel free to reach out to me directly and I'm happy to send them your way. If this talk was of interest to you and you want to read more, Jeremy, Anna, Rachel, and I did put all this information into an article that will be released, we think, in December in Information Technology and Libraries. So please do check that out if you're so inclined. Okay, let's see. We still have some time left. Perfect. We still have 20 minutes or so left for questions and comments. Teresa, actually, I'm not sure what the process is. Should I go ahead and unmute everybody?
I would say go ahead and unmute everyone. If you feel comfortable asking a question and just want to go ahead, that's fine. If you would rather, maybe let's not unmute everyone. Sorry about that. If you would rather type your question, I'm happy to read it out for folks to participate on.
Okay, so I see we did have some in the chat. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Anna. Shared a link to the GitHub repository. Another high five to you. And Anna also put in the chat box a link to the exhibit. So if people wanted to go check out the Mecca site, they can do that. And 50 things. Dude, Anna, you are on it. And Teresa. Okay, great. So does anyone have any questions, or do you want to talk about the work you're doing with collections as data?
So we have a question from Brian Ranick in the chat. Do you restrict the use of the data?
We have not up until this point. We've picked collections where we could make the data publicly available up to this point. So things that don't have any kind of restricted use. Obviously, as we wade into more collections, the Kennecott mining records were the first ones that probably have what could be considered sensitive information. And I don't think that, I mean, those are all public records, I believe, still though. But no, we have not restricted use of the data. We also haven't really promoted the data though. So while we haven't restricted use, we haven't done we haven't really gotten to the point yet where we're shouting it from the rooftops. We put it in a couple places, we circulated it to the Digital Matters listserv, and then that's about it. Nice. So Anna says they're all pre-1919 for the Kennecott mining records. So copyright free. Thanks, Brian. Okay, I see another question from University of Oregon Libraries. Have you talked about including a front-end process for new collections that identifies the potential of the collection for data engagement? No, but I really love that idea, because I think one of the things that we could do that, that wouldn't be terribly difficult is just to talk about how people can use the data. So an example that I think does a good job of this is DocSouth and DocSouth Data, or Documenting the American South. If you go on their website and go to the link DocSouth Data, and you can see a list of the data holdings that they have for those collections that are ready for computational analysis. And in the metadata for that, they say, this is a data set you can use for this particular method. And then they even talk about the skills you would have to do that. So there's a lot of information up front that I think is going to help people know where they have the skills to wade into that analysis and where they don't. And so that's a great idea, that we do have README files for the collections. And I'm sure we could make those more robust, talking about we do a little bit of this actually, but we could do more. Okay. And then Anna said, I think we have an ad hoc process for new collections. Sanders Matchbooks and Kennecott records both have different metadata templates developed with collections as data in mind. And then, Gina, I feel like I should unmute Anna and Rachel. You know what, I am. I'm going to unmute Anna and Rachel because you two should also be able to chime in on these things. And I would unmute Jeremy, but he's in Dubai.
Hi,
Yay,
can you hear me? Okay, this is Anna. We're experimenting a little bit with having a student doing the transcription for the Kennecott records. One thing with crowdsourcing is just that, especially for records where we have some very specific data entry standards that Rachel developed for our student, I'm not sure if going wide with the Kennecott records would work for us or not, but we might consider that at a later date once we're kind of done with this initial pilot.
You should definitely check out From the Page. It's pretty amazing as an interface.
Yeah, I've heard of it. So
yeah, it'll connect directly to your collections, so you don't have to upload, and there is structured fields now.
Interesting. All right, I will check that out. That sounds
Great.
like a little different from the last time
Yeah.
I've heard about it.
They're actively developing.
On the
Cool.
page.
Yeah, Gina, I don't know about this. What is From the Page?
So it's basically an online transcription platform. So it's all done online. People just need a single account and they can access any public project on there. I think it's like fromthepage.org or .com. And it's used by a lot of state archives right now. And we've just started like a month ago, and it's been very exciting. You can do traditional document transcription, including linked subjects, so that you can kind of link names together and they make little graphs and stuff. And then you can also do structured field-based transcription and then export it as CSV or TEI or text.
Nice. That sounds really cool. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I see links from Anna and MWDL. This group is so on it. It's like, you want a resource? Here you go. Hey, do we have any other questions, or anyone else done some collections as data work that they want to share?
So I actually have another question. So coming from a government agency, how do I find a friend at an academic institution to maybe provide data to a project? Because we don't have scholars in state government. So
Yeah, you mean like, how do you find a disciplinary partner?
yeah, exactly. So like, what would be the best way to maybe partner with an institution and then maybe be like a data provider or something like that and participate in a project? Because like, I see potential with vital records, for instance, because you could put together a lot of information about birth and death information.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the first place to start, I would think, would be a couple relevant listservs. So for instance, at the University of Utah, we have the Digital Matters listserv, and it just has like 80 to 100 people on it that are interested in some way in digital scholarship broadly. And it's not just people at the U, because we also have the DHU network, which is Digital Humanities Utah. And so a lot of the people who just participate in that annual symposium on digital humanities in Utah are also on the Digital Matters listserv. So I think reaching out to that network would be a great place to start. The Mountain West Digital Library Network, friends in academic libraries, to see if they know a researcher who might be looking in that field. Because maybe you're not looking for a digital humanist, you're looking for just a subject scholar who can do the analysis once, so you might need 3 partners, like the library, a digital humanist, and a subject specialist. For the Women's Exponent, our team has really grown, but I love that we have representation from the library. We have a faculty partner at BYU, Amy Easton Flake, who works in the College of Religious Education, and she's looked at the Exponent for years and written quite a bit of scholarship on it. And then we also have digital humanities specialists in the form of David Rowe, Brian Croxall, Jeremy Brown. So it's nice. Yeah, and Nate Housley is a grad student that Anna just mentioned in the chat, who did a similar project with Carbon County Oral Histories. So I think just reaching out to your network is probably the best way in finding out if there's people who have, or doing a search, for Utah scholars that have looked at that, maybe relevant topics, and reaching out to them individually.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sure. I just saw a question from MWDL. Do you have an example of a project that came from a researcher or a request for data rather than by the library? I
think Anna answered the question with Nate's example there.
Yeah, Nate is a good example. I'm also thinking of this example that I highlighted in a different presentation. And it was, Anna, correct me if I get the name wrong. It's Invisible Australians, but it's the Invisible Face of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a project, Tim Sherritt, he's a researcher in Australia, and he was trying to get at government records, actually. They were from the National Archives in Australia. And what he wanted to do was do like a image extraction that linked back to the documents. And so he was not able to access that data or download it directly from the archives in Australia. So he had to do he had to do fancy programming to like do automated extraction of all those images and then link them back. So he didn't reach out to the library, to the best of my knowledge. Thank you, the real face of white Australia, Invisible Australians. But what he did was he had to utilize collections, but using his own programming to get at those collections. It would have been much better if he, if he was able to partner with the archivist there and they could, get him the data he needed without him having to go to such advanced technological measures. And I think that's the goal, is just lowering barriers to access. That, Tim Sherratt was able to do that, but most researchers would not be able to. And so we want to make sure that, if maybe they just had access to the TSV or the plain text OCR, they could do their work a little bit easier. Oh, and then Kinza said, a couple of years ago, we had a request from a professor at the U of U Neuroscience Department. He was requesting access to data to the Utah Digital Newspapers program. Yeah, and I know that our newspaper portal has an open API, but that's a great example of how we have an API, but I don't think we really advertise our API, and we have documentation on it, but there's still some pretty high barriers to access. University of Oregon, did you do a cost analysis of these projects? No, we did not. And we've spent a lot of time on them. I mean, getting the data for some of them was not too difficult. I mean, I think we were kind of pleased with like the oral histories and with the Women's Exponent, that if we have the high quality OCR, converting to a plain text file or a TSV file, that didn't take long at all. Anna put time in setting up the GitHub repository, but now that is set up, it's relatively easy just to keep adding projects to it. But other projects, like the Women's Exponent project, we've put innumerable hours on, and I don't even know if I'd want to see what the project has cost us in staff time between BYU and U of U. But I think we've learned so much in the process that we could apply to other projects, and there's a lot of value to that also. And I think if you do bring it from being a pilot to a core organizational activity, that's one of the things you'd have to think about, is what does it cost per collection to turn it into a data set? For some of them, I think the cost would be pretty minimal. As you're doing the digitization, you're already producing the OCR. It's just a matter of, adding a step in your process where you then take that file and make it publicly available as a bulk download. Kinza, did you want to say a word about the API for Utah Digital Newspapers, if you know something about it? You don't have to. I don't know who's muted and who's not. And yeah. Anna just said too, we can export any metadata from the digital library as a TSV file once it's up there, and that's pretty quick. And Anna, isn't that something a user can do? Like, you showed me that from the front end interface, you can export metadata pretty quickly. It's just not something that we really advertise to tell people they can do it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I would need to do some testing, but theoretically, yes. Again, this points to us not really, we're doing this, but not necessarily integrating it across our platforms in a more visible way, which it's always tricky when you're just starting out with something.
Right. And I think it kind of goes to the, the just in time versus just in case. Like, someone can always reach out to us and ask too, and then we can kind of get on trying to gather data or show them how to get it themselves. But, I think moving towards being more proactive and showing kind of that we have data that's really useful for a lot of these projects. And because I don't know if a lot of researchers know that, they love our digital collections, of course, and they love our digital resources, but for someone looking at scale, I don't know if they would know how to access that, or if they would just ask.
Hi, Rebecca. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, Kinza's here.
Sorry, I was having some issues with my audio. But yeah, we had the professor that I was talking about. He was actually looking to have access to the API to the UDN database. And he actually was looking to create a little summer school program for high school students to look at data and play around with that. But at that point, when I talked with Brian, the API wasn't quite available in the way that he was interested in playing around with it. We did provide him a CSV. I think I may have spoken to Tina or Jeremy a couple of years ago, but it wasn't quite working for him. But it's this good chunk of data that you can actually do a lot of things with for the collections of data, component the things that you're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe the API now is available, or at that point in time, there was a high barrier to access with the API in the way that that professor was looking for.
Yeah, and also, Kinza, you bring up a good point too with it's not just for research. I mean, when we think about having this sort of collections as data sets ready to go with good documentation, it also does serve a pedagogical purpose. So I would love to be a place where professors could go and just know that there's multiple modules that they could use to have their students explore the Women's Exponent, for example, or to explore Kennecott mining records, because I think these would be interesting in-class exercises or places where students can experiment with digital humanities methods. So like, I'd love to be the place where they could go for clean data when they're looking for data sets for their classes.
Yeah, we can keep that in mind for next time. And I can actually reach out to him now also and ask him if he's still interested in that. And if he is, he can contact you, and then you can work with Jeremy and Anna and teach on that.
I think right now there's tentative two professors at BYU to use the Women's Exponent data in their class for fall 2020. So that's kind of cool to see. Like, we have put in a lot of time. I think that over the long term, it will have a high impact. Hopefully. That's what we always hope, right? Either way, I will say it's been a lot of fun. I mean, this team has been great, and I think we've learned a lot, and everyone's brought like their different skill set to the group, which has been great.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been so informative as well.
Thank you. And thanks for having me today. I still feel like I'm such a newbie to this, but maybe except for Thomas Padilla, we're like all newbies. So just share what we do know. Do we have any other questions? We still have about 8 minutes left. I imagine a couple people will want to head out for lunch early, and I understand that. Okay.
Thanks for coming, Barb. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I'm probably going to stop the recording right now and turn control back over to Teresa, because I think I'm the host. But thank you everyone for coming today. Again, I appreciate it. I do have one more slide that has just, but then also it has my contact information. So if you want to get a hold of me, Twitter, it's at Rebecca Cummings, and then rebecca.cummings@utah. So thanks so much, everybody. Yana there for 1 more minute.
Thanks everybody for coming. And we'll be sharing the slides and the recording of this short.